collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We hear a lot these days about gender equality, but it isn't just about women. Sweden's coordinator of feminist foreign policy gives us the bigger picture.
Gender equality is an investment in a country's future in terms of education, in terms of a better functioning labour market, in terms of equal representation in parliament, etc. So if we want to tackle the global challenges of today, we need to do that through a feminist foreign policy and apply this gender lens to all the challenges that we see around us.
Should Ecocide be added to the remit of the International Criminal Court?
The basic idea is that once ecocide is an international crime, even a foreign or overseas company will not be able to harm the environment of another country.
And Larnaca goes digital with a virtual reality tour.
We believe that it will be also educational and also good for the tourists to hear about the history of Larnaca and the various places and positions.
Earlier this week, the Swedish ambassador for gender equality, who is also coordinator of the feminist foreign policy at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, was in Nicosia. I met up with her at the Home for Cooperation, where she'd had a series of meetings, but her real reason for coming to Cyprus was to speak at a conference on the role of foreign policy in advancing gender equality, addressing the challenges, pushbacks and obstacles faced by women. She is Sofia Karltorp, and she should know she's spent many years in the Foreign Affairs Ministry of Sweden, including as ambassador to several African countries. So, Sofia, first of all, you've worked in many different aspects, but the role of a woman in many of these, particularly in the last few years, has, I think, changed, because if we go back even 20 years, I don't know about Sweden, it's always been ahead of the field, but in many other countries, women just didn't break that glass ceiling.
No, thank you. That's a very interesting aspect. Throughout my career within the Swedish Foreign Service, I have experienced how the issue of gender equality has become higher and higher on the agenda. Sweden has, since the 1970s, in our internal policies at home, undergone quite a lot of reforms for achieving greater gender equality within our own society. And we have come to realize that without gender equality and the possibilities for women to take part in society on an equal footing with men, it's very difficult to achieve economic development, a sustainable peace, or any type of prosperous society. So that's why our government in 2014 decided to conduct a feminist foreign policy, which means that throughout the whole foreign policy domain, be it trade, international development cooperation, or security policy, we should always look at the issues at hand through a gender lens and make sure that the actions and interventions that we are pursuing are done in a way that they take the gender equality issue into consideration.
I have noticed over the last several years here in Cyprus the increasing number of lady ambassadors from all over the place, not just Europe. We've got now, I believe, a Japanese female ambassador. So this does seem to be something that is slowly gaining ground, but it is very slow. I'm wondering whether or not in Sweden, because you've been at it for so long, you can extrapolate any of your best practices to help countries that are beginning to realise this is the way they need to go.
I think that's an interesting observation, that more and more countries are realising that this is the way to go. If you want to pursue your foreign policy objectives, you need to apply a gender lens to it and work through a feminist foreign policy. And we are very pleased that there are now a number of countries that have followed Sweden's example. Mexico, Spain, France, Luxembourg, to mention a few, that are now pursuing a feminist foreign policy. So with an increased number of female ambassadors here in Nicosia and in other places, and a greater understanding of the need to take gender equality issues into account throughout the foreign policy domain, I'm quite optimistic that we will achieve further progress.
What actually do you mean when you say that you're putting a gender lens on foreign policy? In some countries it may be relatively easy, in others I suspect it's virtually impossible.
It means that when you analyze the situation in a country or in a multilateral fora or any type of foreign policy arena, you do that looking into how women and girls are specifically affected by a certain policy. For example, looking at the issue of economic empowerment, then we need to look into what type of laws and practices do we have for women to access the labor market. We have to look at issues of parental leave, and a number of issues that are crucial to achieve gender equality and parity between sexes.
And education, of course.
And education, of course, not to forget education. I think that's a key area. So what we have managed to do with the feminist foreign policy is to highlight how we need to work throughout all sectors of society if we want to achieve gender equality, but also if we want to make sure that the investments we are making is paying off, because it's actually gender equality is an investment in a country's future in terms of education, in terms of a better functioning labor market, in terms of equal representation in parliament, etc. So if we want to tackle the global challenges of today, we need to do that through a feminist foreign policy and apply this gender lens to all the challenges that we see around us.
How do you quantify the success of your efforts?
That's a good question, but I think we have to look in each and every context that we are active. And as an example, when I served as ambassador of Sweden to Zimbabwe, there was a real issue in terms of equal representation in government, and for a number of years we had discussions with the government on the importance of an equal representation in order to achieve economic development in that country. And actually we then had a government with 30% of women, so that might be called a success or not, but the key success that we can see, I think, is what you rightly said, that other countries are now follow through because they realize that this is the way to go.
And the male point of view on this, because that's also something that I think has changed over the years, and that is that a lot of men in positions to help establish some form of gender equality now see that it isn't just, as it used to be thought, oh, well, it's just women trying to do this, that or the other. They see the ramifications, if you like, throughout society. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that because obviously gender equality is not about, it's not only about women, but it's about equality between men and women, boys and girls. So to have men as an active part in the fight for greater gender equality is key. Also looking into how we can change norms in society to really make people understand that this is the way to go if you want to invest in the future of your country, in the future of your children. Then gender equality is a key component. And I have myself met with many men who have not really thought about gender equality before they saw their daughters growing up, and they could see then that this is actually an issue that we all need to engage on, and they became great activists for gender equality in society because they could see how their daughters were affected by discrimination in different ways. So definitely the men play a key role.
And a little bit about your talk that you gave at that conference organised by our Foreign Ministry. It wasn't just about advancing gender equality, you also addressed the challenges, pushbacks and obstacles faced by women. Now they, I imagine, are very similar across the board in some places, and then there must be specific ones that are very difficult to overcome in others. What would you say the main challenges and obstacles are?
I mean, what we have seen, which is extremely worrisome, is how the pandemic has meant a real pushback for gender equality sort of across the spectrum. We have seen an increase in economic impoverishment of women. Women are mainly working in the informal sector in many countries, and they have lost out greater than men with the harsh economic measures we have seen following the pandemic. But also, of course, in terms of education, the pandemic has led to many girls leaving school, possibly getting into child marriages instead. And then thirdly, we have seen a sharp increase in violence against women and domestic violence across the world during the lockdown periods. So there's definitely a lot of things to do ahead, especially now when we look at the recovery from the pandemic. How can we make sure that that is done in a way that takes gender equality into account, and to make sure that the specific needs of women are addressed in the recovery.
Women who are particularly at risk of being marginalised are probably those who, in a sense, have the least opportunity to push back against that. What's the answer to empowerment of those sorts of groups of women in whatever country they may be? But I'm sure there are lots of them across the world who just feel there isn't anything they can do because they're not allowed to get together with other women or indeed sympathetic men to fight against it.
Well, and that's why it's so important that as international community, as active engaged partners globally, to really highlight the issue constantly again and again, and put demands on our partners that women are included and that women groups are allowed to meet and that they are supported in different ways.
Which brings us lastly, please, to Cyprus and the fact that women on both sides of the Green Line have various organisations that they meet together, they talk, they walk, they sing, they do a lot of things, but it doesn't seem to be getting them very much further in terms of representation, certainly, on those people who are discussing a solution to the Cyprus problem. The representation of women in our negotiating teams is appalling. I'm not sure it even exists half the time.
Now, I'm very uplifted by the extremely interesting and rich conversations I have had with women activists and groups here today, and I'm convinced that stronger female representation in any peace process and in any solution to any conflict is key if you want to achieve a sustainable solution. You need to bring the women to the table and you need to listen to them. So it's been very encouraging to see the engagement that you have here in Cyprus among many different women from all walks of life on this issue. So I really do hope, of course, that those voices are heard in different ways.
We hope so too. We've been talking to Sweden's Ambassador for Gender Equality and the coordinator of their Feminist Foreign Policy. She is Sofia Kaltop, and she was in Cyprus earlier this week.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Earlier this week in Nicosia, the Friends of the Earth organised an event that was entitled Biodiversity and Ecocide. The main speaker was my next guest. She is Paraskevi Christodoulou. Paraskevi, you are with a group called Stop Ecocide International. Now, I want you to tell me about that group, but maybe we better start by asking you to define ecocide.
Basically, ecocide means unlawful or wanton act committed with knowledge that there is substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. basically, academically, if you want to translate that, it means long-term damage to the ecosystems or widespread damage to the ecosystems.
What sort of things would you say are the main causes of ecocide?
Right, ecocide is either anthropogenic or it's extreme phenomena from, for example, volcano eruptions or floods.
Or forest fires, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, exactly. And the goal of the organization is basically to make a fifth crime against ecocide, which is going to be focused on the anthropogenic causes of ecocide, which is extreme mining, fracking, a lot of deforestation in large amounts of land and pieces of soil, degradation and deforestation that causes also desertification, or other fossil fuel industries that they pollute the air extremely. These sort of things.
I can see that it's a great idea if this does become an international crime, but that means, of course, that it would be ending up in courts, because doubtless the people causing the problem would fight having to pay for it, whether it be monetarily or even with prison sentences. And the problem seems to me that if you take, for example, deforestation, how much deforestation is ecocide? I know that we all know, for example, what's happening with the logging in the Amazon and so on, and those are vast areas. But let's take a place the size of Cyprus and say that large areas we know have been cleared in the mountains for solar parks or whatever they happen to be, and that in a sense is also ecocide because it's completely destroying the biodiversity of that particular area.
Right, that's a great question actually. It's often come up with other speakers, but basically what we're supposedly try to do is to put up to the courts to decide how much is too much, basically. So the limit is up to the court, and also it has to do with how much environmental damage is going to cause these exactly at the size of Cyprus, because a smaller island can have immediate effects on other ecosystems that are neighboring the ecosystem that is destroyed.
Who would be assessing these impacts, for example, of one country across its border into another country, or indeed how long it would take an ecosystem to recover? Because we know that they do after, for example, forest fires, but it takes a long time.
Exactly. Well, other than the court, it's of course the people that will oversee and supervise this law. But we're talking about an international law, an international criminal law. So when it comes to the people that they decide these things, it's also both the government, the academics, and also the public. And we hope that there will be a sort of legal mediation for these things to basically stop happening, because the basic idea is that once ecocide is an international crime, even a foreign or overseas company will not be able to harm the environment of another country. So CEOs, the decision makers, they will have to be careful about how much damage they're going to do, and they have to prove that that damage is absolutely worth it in terms of both civilization protection and also the ecosystem protection.
It sounds to me like you're rather hoping you might end up with an international ecocide court like we have the International Criminal Court.
We don't have a court, and we're not exactly hoping for an international ecocide court, but we mostly want to put this crime in the ICC at the Rome Statute, which is going to be the fifth crime against peace, alongside genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression.
OK, well, that's what I meant when I was talking about having a parallel court with specialists who know about the environment and ecocide dealing specifically with that.
It's mostly like, I think they're going to be integrated. The hope is to be integrated into the same sphere. So, yeah.
And tell me about the event on Tuesday, I think it was. Was it well attended, and what sort of reaction did you get?
Right. So the event was basically how ecocide relates to the loss of biodiversity, and also like those two are also connected with the climate crisis that we're facing right now. And the basis of this is, although it's a global and a world crisis, we're trying to see how it will affect policies and laws that we have right now in Cyprus.
And in every country. I guess the only way to fight this really is locally, the old thing about fight it locally to have a global impact.
Exactly. So that's the reaction that we hope that will inspire people that they were present to actually act locally so we can have a global result.
And would you say that the average Cypriot citizen or person residing in Cyprus has these matters at the forefront of their concerns?
Well, if they don't, they should, because it's their children's future that it's on bets here, literally. So we have to figure out a way to protect that future. It's important for their children and their grandkids also.
And of course, with the COP26 going on this week, a lot of countries were pulling back from the sort of pledges they had said they would make. It does seem that despite the severity of the crisis with regard to climate change and global warming, that once again big business is putting its own concerns ahead of those of everybody else.
Yes, and also the lobbying industry of fossil fuels, we know that it's going to be there, and that's a very dangerous thing. Unfortunately, we cannot do something right now, and that's the reason why we insist on ecocide becoming an international crime. We need ecocide in order to pressure the government and the CEOs and the industry itself that causes this harm to stop, to put an end to it, or at least, at the very least, some limits.
Well, it is, I think, heartwarming to know that an increasing number of people who are all, of course, consumers are looking very carefully at the environmental and general well-being credentials of the companies where they spend their money. So I suppose that is another huge way of every single citizen in the world becoming a lobbyist on their own.
Yeah, exactly. And also we have a petition that if you sign it, you actually declare your support for this campaign.
Where can people find that petition?
They can find it on our website. It's stopecocide.earth.
Stopecocide.earth. That was Paraskevi Christodoulou, who was talking in Nicosia this week on behalf of Stop Ecocide International about those problems facing our environment and its rampant destruction.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Tourism in Cyprus, of course, has suffered as much or if not more than many other areas of our business sector during the lockdown and the COVID pandemic. So it's interesting to see that in Larnaca, the tourism development and promotion company, ETAP, has come up with a virtual Larnaca project. The president of ETAP is Dinos Lefkaridis. He joins us now. Dinos, where did the idea of this come from? I'm interested to know whether or not it's something that people who are not in Cyprus can still use to, in a sense, visit Larnaca, or are you aiming at people who are in Larnaca and giving them an easy way to, if you like, have a tourist guide?
Well, the whole idea actually came from Cypriot guys. Cypriot young people, which they are. You realize the young people are more or less on the digital side. And when they told me the idea, I have said, let's go ahead for it. And it turned out to be a very good idea. It was presented last week. The Minister of Tourism was present as well. And it was presented in the old, in an old house in Larnaca, which was a very nice presentation, and everybody was very pleased with it.
So what does it actually do?
What actually do is that you present various ancient monuments through a virtual system, which you think that you are there. You get back, say, so many years back in the ancient history. You see the old port of Gideon, which is virtually, you feel that you are there by wearing these glasses, and you think that you are back in 400 before Christ or whenever.
So in terms of wearing the glasses for those virtual things, I guess you have to be in Cyprus. But you've also, I think, initiated tours of some of the museums. Now, is that something that someone sitting in London or Athens or somewhere else can actually log on and do a virtual tour without being here?
Yes, I think this is possible. At the moment, we are trying to put it in the museum here in Larnaca, which will be open pretty soon. It will be also presented in various other places, which we are working on it with the Ministry of Tourism. And yes, you're absolutely right. You can log in and you can visit the ancient history of Larnaca and the various places that they are in the system.
And tell me about the talking statues.
That's another idea again. You have a barcode in various positions in Larnaca, the statue of Kimon, the statue of Xenon, the various statues. You put your phone there and your phone reads the barcode, and then automatically there is a telephone call from Kimon or from Xenon who tells you his story. It's a story of what he was, what he had done, and various information from the ancient history.
It's bringing history to life, really, isn't it? Do you think the schools will make use of this?
Yes, of course. We are presenting it to various schools. Yes, we believe that it will be also educational and also good for the tourists to hear about the history of Larnaca and the various places and positions. Something else is not only in Larnaca, it's also in the outskirts of Larnaca, which we are working on it, various places where we can put these gimmicks.
And it's not just outside Larnaca as well, it's in the sea, because you have, of course, the Xenovia, which is a very well-known across the world diving site, but I think there are others, and you've also included those for underwater tours.
Yes, it's in the virtual system. You can see Xenovia, you can see the other wreck which we have done lately, last year, or the year before, Elpida. And yes, you can see various other things, and we will be updating the system with other places, other positions as well.
So it's an ongoing project by the sound of it?
It is, and it's something that we've been working with the municipality, with the Chamber of Commerce, with the Ministry of Tourism, and there is a big thank you to everybody, because this is something that when everybody works together, you succeed and you make something good.
And have you had any feedback from people who've tried it out?
Well, everybody is very happy, very enthusiastic about the whole thing, and we hope that this will add to our tourism and educationally the whole of Larnaca.
I'm sure it will. That is Dinos Lefkaridis, who's president of ETAP, which is the Larnaca Tourism Development and Promotion Company, telling us there about their new project for virtual tours of Larnaca, of the sea, and those talking statues. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.